Yeah, hello, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today for the New Mexico Weather Outlook webinar series. My name is Helena Deswood, and I'm the Tribal Coordinator for the USDA Southwest Climate Hub. And before we get started, I want to go over some logistics. Everyone is muted and the webinar is being recorded. The webinar recording will be shared with attendees afterwards, and it will also be available on the Quivira Coalition and the NIDIS websites. Please enter your questions and comments in the Q&A box. Joel will be moderating the Q&A session, and Victoria will go over some announcements and close our session today. These monthly webinar presentations will provide information on current and upcoming weather and climate conditions in New Mexico with a highlight on conditions in tribal lands. The webinar will take place on the fourth Thursdays for the next 3 months at 10:30 a.m. Mountain Time on July 23rd, August 27, and September 24. The webinar series was made possible by the following partners: Dave Dubois from New Mexico Climate Center, Victoria Atencio from Santa Ana Pueblo Department of Natural Resources, Ariel Quintana and Leah Potter-White from Quivira Coalition, Joel Leisenby from NOAA NIDIS, and the USDA Southwest Climate Hub. Our contact information will be at the end of the presentation today. Please feel free to reach out to us with any questions or suggestions for future webinars. So here's Victoria with upcoming events and announcements.
Good morning, everyone. I hope you're all doing well. Prior to our update with Dave, we'd quickly like to mention a few upcoming events and announcements. The first one is a webinar hosted by the University of Arizona, focusing specifically on drought in the Southwest, looking at the current conditions and outlooks. That will be on June 29th at 11 a.m. Registration link is provided here. The second one is on behalf of the New Mexico Coalition to Enhance Working Lands. They are offering a drought resources webinar series that will extend into July. More information can be found on their webpage. The link to that webpage is also found here. The New Mexico Tribal Resilience Action Network will also be offering a series of webinars on climate resilience, focusing in on tribal communities in the Southwest. The first webinar of that series will be held on July 8th at 11 a.m. Mountain Time. Registration for this event will be released soon. Please follow the NMTRAN webpage on Facebook for updates for this upcoming webinar series. And for more information, you can contact Cynthia Naha. Her email is provided here. Lastly, the Pueblo of Santa Ana, in collaboration with the Southwest Climate Hub and Quivira Coalition, have rescheduled their rangeland precipitation monitoring workshop to the fall of 2021. Those who have already registered for this workshop will remain registered and notified with upcoming updates. As of right now, those are the only updates, and I will give that back to you, Helena.
Thanks, Victoria. So I'd like to introduce our speaker today. Dr. Dave Dubois is the state climatologist for New Mexico, director for the New Mexico Climate Center, and associate college professor at the New Mexico State University. He provides climate change information and education to policymakers, the agricultural community, industry, educators, students, and the public. In addition, he also gives numerous talks and holds webinars every year on topics covering climate, drought, air quality, and climate change. Thanks for being with us here today, Dave.
You bet. Before we start, do I have a sound check? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
All right. Okay. Well, thanks for the introduction. We'll get started. Basically, I'm going to be talking about the conditions up till June 24th. I updated a couple things this morning, but mainly conditions up till yesterday. So let's get rolling. Okay, let's look at the rainfall over the last month, 30 days. This is from the radar-based product over New Mexico and Arizona, and a little bit over in Panhandle, Texas. Pretty much most counties had some rain, but the problem is it's not a lot. It was very hit or miss. We had the dry line come over from the east and dump a bunch of thunderstorms. If you're right under there, you're doing great. However, those are very small amounts, up to maybe a half an inch in little places, a couple little dumps, hot spots of a couple inches, but not a whole lot over the whole area. I'm going to look at a few of the specific stations. I've been following these for the last few webinars. So first one is Cochiti Dam. We're going to start at the water year, which is started in October 2019 and going to the present. So these are maps to show accumulated rainfall. That the smooth brown line is the long-term normals, the long-term averages, and then the green line that has like little steps in it. That's the actual rainfall accumulation. So if you can look there, since October, we've had 8.47 inches, and that's above average, 118% average, and we actually had a lot more, a bit more last year, 9.6 last year. So let's go over to Los Lunas. Okay, so we've got another little point that has above average. It's 117% of average. Right now, we've got 6.11 inches for the water year, and almost about the same, 6.54 last year. So in records back to this station go back to 1957. Going further up toward the north, very far north, bordering Colorado, Dulce, same time scale water year since October 2019. Current water year is at 7.68. Last year we had over 15 inches last year. So you can see below that long-term average, we're behind by about 4.12 inches for the water year, and that's represented about 65% of normal. And records for this station go back to 1906. Going all the way to the San Juan County and Farmington, current water year is at 3.41 compared to 7.63 last year. You can see where we're really missing some precip, both in the cool season, and we really hadn't had any significant rain there since middle March. So we're about 1.9, almost 2 inches behind for the water year, and that's about 64% of normal. And records there go back to 1978. So I'm in the slide that has Streamflow. Look at a few little gauge locations. So up in the upper left, we got the Animas River. The squiggly blue line, that's the actual discharge in cubic feet per second, and then those little triangles, those are the median long-term. That for the Animas station, we had 96 years of data, so we can see we're right about average in the early part, very beginning of June, but we've hit the peak flow down on the Animas, and then we're much below average. We usually get about 2,000 CFS this year, and right now we're about 500. If you go to the upper right, Rio Grande for the Embudo station, similar story, we're well below average. And if you go further down to Rio Grande and Albuquerque, we're pretty low, about 500 CFS, when we should be somewhere around 1,000. And then, of course, we can't forget Pecos over on the bottom left. That's the Pecos right above the Santa Rosa Reservoir. Right now, we're sitting about just below 10 CFS, and on long-term average, this 44-year average, we should be sitting about 30 or 40 CFS. So kind of indicative of what we're seeing in other areas. Let's look at storage volumes for some of the reservoirs. This is updated from this week. We had our drought meeting this week, just showing you kind of absorb some of these numbers. For Santa Rosa, it's right in the middle there. We're at 4,000 acre feet, and the reason why it's so low is Carlsbad Irrigation District had called for the one and only block release of the year. They called for 38,000 acre feet down to Brantley, and that's from Ray Abeta over at the Reclamation. Some noteworthy, Elephant View is at 25% of the average, and the average is 1981 to 2010. Some other noteworthy, Herons at 40% of average, as well as Elvado's at 40%. Over in the Pecos, Sumner is 48% of average. Brantley is above average because of some of the block releases there. So we're seeing, where most of the reservoirs are below average. So let's move on to some other drought impacts. So let's look at, we're in this situation where we have pretty dry soil, and this is a 1 month average, comparing the last month with previous months long-term average. So if you can see over on the far right, on the west side, bordering Arizona. It's very dry over there. However, basically you're seeing some little bit of wet areas from the last rain event over on the east side of the state, but however, that's short term. And if we go to, I'm going to go to the next slide. Let me show you kind of the longer term. If you look at the 6 months, so if you look at the last 6 months and compare that to the long-term average of 6 months over in the past, there's big areas of New Mexico are very dry. The Southwest, most of East Central, very dry compared to the long-term average. So this is a column relative soil moisture, and this is up until valid up until yesterday. And I don't think a lot of the storms that we had really made a big difference in this, because this is more of a longer-term situation where we're seeing very dry in the column. So how is this actually impacting some of the vegetation? So this is a product called the Vegetation Drought Response Index up till it's the latest one. You can see where it basically is colored by the vegetation condition. You can see most of all, if you go upwards of north of I-40, pretty dry to moderate to a few patches of severe and extreme. And then similar in the whole southeast part of the state. And if you can see that big patch in northern Lee County, where it's all moderate drought there. So it's indicative of soil moisture as well as the vegetation stress. This is a new product here. It's called GrassCast. It's basically changing grassland production. So the question is, so for the 3 maps over in the left is if we have above average rainfall, and if we in the middle is if we have average rainfall, and then the right is if we have below average rainfall. And the question is, if for the 3 maps, if precipitation between now and end of August is above, near, or below average, we estimate that the grassland production in Arizona, New Mexico this summer will be whatever percent is in the maps, more or less than the long-term average. So what's concerning to me is even if we get an average monsoon, and that's if you look at the center map, the coloring on that, there are areas pretty much east of the central mountain chain in the plains that they're negative, which means there's less than the long-term average, even if we get average monsoonal rainfall. In a few areas in Eddy County, parts of San Miguel, and a few other little patches are even less. So that's a concern we'll be looking at. And of course, if we're well above average over on the left side, we're doing pretty well, but even a few areas there in Colfax County, there is concern for some forage decrease. So how can you help with this? Well, we've got this program. If you're part of COCORAS, which is the Community Collaborative Rain, Hail, and Snow Network, you can help us out with contributing to gauging drought. And this is the screenshot from the COCORAS website, and I put the link there on the page. If you want to write that down, if you haven't heard of this, you may want to look into it. cocoras.org, COCORAHS.org. So if you're a member, you can actually submit a condition monitoring report for your area, and you can gauge that. And let me just show you what it looks like when all of our observers contribute. Well, not all of them, but a few number of them. So this is a map of all the reports that were submitted from June 18th through the 24th. And the legend over the right shows how bad or good the conditions in their backyard or their range areas. So most of the areas are showing this mildly dry to all the way to severely dry, and then the U.S. Drought Monitor is in the coloring in the background. So it's a good indicator that we're not only seeing very dry conditions from all the indicators, the soil maps and precipitation, but we're also seeing, as folks look out the backyard to see how it is. So here's the next slide. Here is the latest U.S. Drought Monitor, which was released this morning, showing more than half of the state is in drought. From that level D1 to D4, there's 53% of the state is in that D1 through 4, and 41% of the state is in D2 to D4. So this is where we've been tracking. The latest change was down in Eddy County and Lee County. We connected up with Texas. We're likely going to see, if we don't get any preset, we're likely going to see continued degradation on this. So stay tuned. So let's look at some of the outlooks. kind of give you a real brief summary of the conditions out there right now. So what are we looking forward to? So one of the things we look at for the seasonal prediction is how is the oceans helping us, changing the circulation patterns. So one of the things we look at, we cue in on some of the areas of the ocean that have proven to be helpful in analyzing climate change, and this is short-term climate. So if you look at that over on the left side, there's a Nino 3.4. That's basically is showing you that area. If you look on the bottom right, that Nino 3.4 box in the Central Pacific, and gauging that whether it's above normal, above average, which is the brownish color, and then if it's below average, it's blue. So if you go back on that left chart, that Nino 3.4, I circled that little area. So we've been above average for most of the water year, and then we recently dipped into the cooler than average this spring, and we continue to be there. And if you go on that upper right map, you can see the areas where it's blue. Those are cooler than average, and over on the east side of the Pacific, and then if you go on the west side of the Pacific, over along the equator, it's warm. So we've got a gradient in temperature of the sea surface temperature. So what does that mean? So what we use that input to the models, and then we try to predict that, because that gives us a sense of what's going to happen in on the seasonal scale. So if we go to the next slide, it's basically like a spaghetti diagram of the models. So basically it's the same graph that I showed you earlier. So if you're in the middle there is 0, if it's above that, if it's positive, that's it's warmer than average sea surface temperatures. If it's below that, negative, it's cooler. Or and so right now the models are showing it's likely that the oceans are going to be a little bit below average for the rest of the calendar year, and then we'll see what goes on after that. So if it goes below the minus 0.5 for a significant amount of time, that would be an indicator of a heading toward a La Nina. So it's right. A lot of the models are right at the average. So if it's not quite more than 0.5, we call that neutral El Nino Southern Oscillation. So how's that translated into probabilities of what type of signal we're getting? So this is a probability map. So it shows you the probabilities of either a La Nina, neutral, or a El Nino. So the red is the El Ninos, which those are really small because we're seeing a cooler sea surface temperature. So basically it's a duel between the neutral and La Nina. So the blue there is a La Nina, the gray is a neutral. So basically it's duking it out there. So we've got right about the same probabilities all the way through the end of the year. Through December, it can go either way, about 40% probability for each one of those. So we're currently neutral, and it could go either way on a neutral, continue to be neutral, or possibly even to dip cooler into La Nina territory. So we'll show you what that means a little later. So let's look at the precipitation forecast. This is short term. This is from the Weather Prediction Center at NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. This is the 168-hour, 7-day outlook for precipitation. So this is all the way from today all the way to the second day of July. Not a lot of precip, fairly dry period. You can see down in Mexico, you can see that precipitation creeping up, but it's not here yet. And I know, although we've gotten some moisture just bringing in from the tropics, subtropics, but this isn't the monsoon yet. It's still further down in Mexico, and we're maybe even seeing a slight delay in the monsoon from the models. And let's go a little further out in the forecast. So here's looking out at the 6 to 10 day. That's basically going out to July 4th. Over on the left is the temperature probability. So most of the west is likely going to be cooler, but we're right about in the middle of that. So if you're on the four corners, because of the some of the storm systems may get a little bit some cloudy, but over in the middle of the U.S. Above average. And if you go on the right side of the graph, right side of the slide, there's a signal that's going to be below average dry. So that's kind of reflecting a bit on the previous slide. There's pretty good chance of being dry for most through the July 4th holiday here. So let's go a little further out. Let's go out to the 8 to 14 day. So this takes us out to July 9th. Over on the left, same picture with temperature probability. It's going to be warm, but over on the right side, the map there, same story with the precip. It looks to be dry out through July 9th. So not a good sign for the monsoon coming up early. It's likely going to be coming up later in July. Let's go out 3 or 4 weeks. So this takes us out to July 17th. Basically, broken record for the temperatures, above average, but over on the right, yep, there's that signal there that we like to see that above average, that little B, but that B means below average, so there's an enhanced probability of below average out through even the second week in July. So we'll see how that goes. I'm hoping we're wrong, but this is our latest model runs from the NOAA Climate Prediction Center, showing us what the probabilities are for the monsoon. So if we look out the rest of July, let me just focus in on the right side. That's the precipitation. So for the shorter term, out through the middle of July, it looked like there was a dry signal, but for the whole month as a whole, it can go either way, and is likely after the second week, we will likely get the monsoon after that, but it's a little bit late. So in terms of the total precipitation, it could go either way on below or above average. So not a lot of help, but at least the indicator is saying it's going to be delayed a bit this year. If we go further out through most of a whole monsoon, so this is July through September, and this one just came out. These maps came out on the 18th of June, so there's the ink's a little bit still wet on these. So over on the right side of the map, there is showing most of New Mexico has equal chances, which means it can go either way in terms of above or below average. However, I say in the north part, look at that below average signal in the Pacific Northwest going all the way out to the northern plains, not northern plains, but more of the northern Rockies, I should say. Then it kind of dips a little bit into northern New Mexico, so that's not a good signal for precip in the mountains. So let's go out one more in our book here. Let's go out the extended. So this is going out through October. Basically seeing the same kind of signal there on the right map there. October below average for at least for the northern part of the state, and then the probabilities even get a little stronger in in Colorado through most of the half of Utah into the very northern mountains in New Mexico. We'll see how this pans out. It's not a good sign. However, that it's better news for southern New Mexico and Arizona. At least there's equal chances over there that we could be seeing the monsoon, but there's that signal coming up at below average in the Four Corners. So which is pretty bad because we've got some nasty drought there as you can remember from the U.S. Drought Monitor map. So how does that reflect on the seasonal drought outlook? And this was released on June 18th, and this is valid all the way through the end of September, from now through the end of September. So the dark brown, that's basically saying drought's going to persist over, and that we're sharing it all the way through Oklahoma, all the way to Oregon, and a few areas in Wyoming, but that's going to stick around likely. And so the areas, if you go in the southeast New Mexico and part of North Texas, the Panhandle, there's possibility that they're saying this drought remains but improves. And then over on the far edge of that, we'll likely see some drought removal likely over on the far. So this is what the Climate Prediction Center produced, and we'll see how this goes. I'm hoping we're wrong, but this is what is being laid out and shown here. So I just want to thank all the organizers of this webinar and giving me opportunity to kind of give my perspective, and I'll be very happy to answer any questions that may have popped up. And thank you.
Thanks, Dave. So Hi, everyone. This is Joel from NIDIS. I'll be administering the questions as they come through. So far, there has not been any questions show up in the question box, so feel free to throw some in if there's anything that come to your mind. But I have a question for you, Dave.
Yep.
You mentioned a little bit that, well, you mentioned about halfway through your talk that the Pacific Ocean is leaning toward a La Nina right now, and the odds are such that we're ruling out an El Nino. It could either be a neutral ENSO phase this year, or we may have a developing La Nina. What does a La Nina usually mean for New Mexico?
Well, most of the time, the impacts of the ENSO, which is El Nino Southern Oscillation, which La Nina is one of the phases. Most of the impacts are there on the cool season. It impacts, and everyone is different. However, if I was to say, to generalize, it usually means if it's a La Nina phase, remember that's the cooler than average sea surface temperatures in the tropical Pacific Ocean. The La Ninas have been in the past warmer and drier for New Mexico, and that's the highest probability of that is usually south of I-40. It's stronger correlation for a warmer and drier winter for La Ninas, and that we could also see, and for the neutral, it's less. The probability is a little less. We've had some neutrals where we had some really good mountain snows, and then we've had some neutrals that were just bone dry. So, but we really it gives us a sense of where we could go if we continue to go into La Nina. That could show up as a warmer and drier winter time, which is not good. I mean, we had some good snowpack 2 years ago in a few areas. This year we're good, but not. We had early melt off, and so we would rather have an El Nino. That's what because those are usually cooler and wetter winters. So mainly it doesn't really help predict the monsoon. There's a different phenomena, different areas of the ocean that affect the monsoon than they do the El Nino. So the monsoon, as we remember, is driven by the large scale, the seasonal pattern, bringing up high pressure and drawing in either the subtropical moisture, kind of like clockwork, bringing in either Gulf or the Gulf of California. And we haven't really seen that. We can see the moisture creeping up from Mexico, where most of the moisture we see coming into Arizona. Arizona usually gets it a little bit before we do. Southern part of the state gets it prior to the northern part, and it can move back and forth during the monsoon. So we're waiting to see. I'm pretty confident. It's going to be a little bit delayed. That's the main story. Is not expect a lot. I mean, things happen pretty quickly. Once it gets into Sonora, once we see that those big storms pop up in the satellite, things can happen very quickly, and they can easily pop into Arizona. But for the longer term, we have to wait until the winter season for the La Nina neutral. Which way is that going to go?
Thanks, Dave. And for those of us like me who don't really follow the monsoon that closely, when you say it's likely to be delayed, when does it usually start?
It starts in Mexico first, and we see usually, and not always, but most of the time, Arizona usually sees the storms pop up little before July, and a lot of folks down here in southern New Mexico, the common knowledge is right around July 4th. You see right when the fireworks, that's usually one of the starts. So it can wiggle either way, but it's usually the very beginning of July. In the southern part of the state, and as you get further north, it takes another week for it to impact areas. And of course, that varies. Every year is different. And then of course, sometimes we're dry and Arizona gets it, and then the high moves over toward the east or further north, and then Arizona's dry and New Mexico gets wet. So it all depends on the large scale dynamics of the atmosphere to steer the moisture. and where is it dipping from, and then where is it going to be going next.
Okay.
It's fascinating.
Yeah, love that. Thanks for that explanation. I've had 3 questions, well, 2 questions and a comment come through. I'll read these and I'll let you take them one at a time. The first one is a bit of a compliment. Nice presentation. Thank you, Dave. How
Thanks.
about groundwater and the drought relationship? Can you talk about how drought impacts groundwater supply?
Most of the areas that groundwater it's part of the drought. We get a hydrologic drought. Most of the time, those are longer term. There are some basins where we get shorter term. There's a quicker connection between precipitation and groundwater. Most of the areas, and that's not all the areas, we're seeing a decline in the groundwater. But I can't say it's everywhere, and there are a few little areas where it's actually increasing. But it is something we do track in drought. However, not for the drought monitor, but for the longer term, we look at it on decadal basis, looking at, specifically on the east side of the state where our main concerns are, where the big changes in the decline, you have to go further down in the ground to get water these days. And that's sort of indicative all the way through. We've all heard of the Ogallala aquifer, seeing that that decline. So it is worrisome from a climatological perspective, and of course, as a producer, you see the day in and out challenges with that.
Thanks, Dave. The next one is a comment from Jerry. Says, thanks, Dave. It's not easy bearing bad news. Thank you for your work. And then the final question that we have time for today comes from Maurice, and it asks, if we continue in the direction of hot, dry trend, can we expect the irrigation season in southern New Mexico to be cut short?
Well, I think most of the irrigation is based on the storage of, it first starts off in the snowpack, and then how much water gets stored in the reservoirs. And each of the irrigation districts does it differently. Like Elephant Butte Irrigation District, Carlsbad, there's other ones. So those are mainly driven by how much is water, how many acre feet of water, and then the allocations, and then of course the compacts, which are, for the Rio Grande compact, we've got 2 countries in 2 states dealing with that. So all that is kind of clockwork in terms of planning from the winter time, how much release, and then how much is actually going to go down to the individual farmers and ranchers. And most of that is, there are a lot more losses. With the higher than average, above average temperatures, we're going to see losses due to evaporation, soil losses, as well as the increased demand from plants. They're going to need more water. So there's more demand, and the increased evaporation rates on all the reservoirs, as well as the individual plants and areas. So yeah, I don't remember the allocations for the different irrigation districts. We could probably follow up with that later, maybe next month. We can talk about how many acre feet are getting at, for CID and EBID. But yeah, it does have an impact on it though, but it's mainly a snowpack one.
Okay, thanks for that explanation, Dave. I think that'll wrap up the questions. So thank you for those of you who submitted questions. Again, thank you, David, for your expertise. And I'll hand back to Helena to close us off. Helena, are you still there?
Victoria will be closing
Hi,
this.
this is Victoria.
Oh, Victoria. Sorry about that.
And so it's fine. I just wanted to thank everybody for participating in today's webinar. And thank you to all of our organizers for our collaboration efforts. And if anybody has any additional topics that you would like us to cover in a future webinar, you can place that in the chat box, or you can contact any of our organizers. Our emails are provided on the slide. We hope this information can help you plan for the summer. As Helena had mentioned in the intro, this webinar is recorded and will be shared with our attendees, as well as being available on the Quivira Coalition and NIDIS websites. Please feel free to reach out to us if you have any other questions. Stay safe and healthy, everybody.